All right. Let's move right along with our tutorials on the Develop module in Adobe Lightroom Classic. Previously, we looked at creating contrast using the tone curve, and you can see here's my S curve on this image with my black point raised and my white point lowered to kind of create that matte or that old school film look. We're not going to use the tone curve. Now we could do color grading. So since we've color corrected at this point, now we're going to do color grading, and we could do that in the tone curve using the red, green, and blue channels, but that's more advanced. We'll come back to that in a future tutorial. We'll show you the easier way first. We also adjusted some exposure, some highlights, and some shadows in the basic panel. We did this after the tone curve because it blew some areas out. We need to fix a few things. I'm going to close that too. So now we're going to do color grading. So color correcting gets us to a point where we've corrected exposure, corrected white balance, and created the contrast that we want. And I created really good contrast, really contrasty image here. Now in color grading, we can actually introduce some colors that might not necessarily been in the image. We can add some blues to the highlights or shadows, some yellows to the highlights or shadows, or you could do a CW Riverdale look with cyan and magenta. But before we do that, this is a step that I find very important. I've color corrected, I've got my photo to a good point. Before I start experimenting some more, I want to come down to the film strip on the bottom, and I have this photo selected. I got it to a point that I like. I now want to right click on it, and I want to create a virtual copy. Now there are two copies. This second copy doesn't add any space, right? It's just a copy of the first. It's virtual. And now we can experiment with other features in the Develop module like color grading without screwing up the one that we got to at a pretty good point. This way we don't have to reset or start over all of the color correcting stuff if we mess up, okay? So here we are on our virtual copy. What we're going to do is some color grading, and we're going to skip the tone curve, more advanced, and we're going to drop down to split toning. We're also on a future tutorial look at HSL and color sliders, all right? But for right now, I'm going to jump down to split toning. This is a very common technique right now. This kind of cinematic look where you have some teal in the shadows and some yellow or gold in, or sorry, teal or blue in the highlights and some yellow or gold in the shadows. I guess you can actually reverse it too. If you look at the color wheel, those two colors are opposite of the color wheel, and things opposite of the color wheel create more contrast. And this is a very popular look in blockbuster movies, and people have started in Instagram and other areas doing this to their photos. I have also seen another popular version of this where it's cyan and magenta like in Riverdale. So here's a couple techniques to do this. I have split toning panel open. I have highlights on the top, shadows on the bottom, where it's split between highlights and shadows. Hue is essentially color, all right? What color do we want to add to the highlights? Now, if I drag this to the right, and this is going to blue, you'll notice my picture here on the left hasn't changed. That is because how much of this hue is added to the highlights right now is zero. Zero saturation. So I can move this all I want and I can't see what it's doing. So if you hold the Option key, as you drag the hue slider, you can look at the picture to my left. Don't pay attention to where I'm sliding, just look at the left. You can see that it's changing hue colors in the highlights. So I'm going to go to kind of a teal color over here. It's what's popular at the moment. I'm going to go somewhere over here, get kind of a blue. All right. As soon as I let go of the Option key, it goes back to normal. Then I can adjust the saturation slider, and I can pick how much of that blue I want in the highlights. And then, as I mentioned, typically we're going opposite of the color wheel down here in the shadow, so I could do the same thing. Well, actually, I'm going to do this a different way. So I showed you the technique with the sliders where I held Option. Here's another technique. If you click this little square right here and click on that, then you can see that I have this color picker. All right. So we did this color right here. And on this color picker, we have kind of the gradient all the way across. Okay. And from top to bottom is saturation of that color. And so I can come over here and I can click and drag up, down, left, right. Left and right's the hue, up and down is the saturation. I'm going opposite of the color wheel over here, and I'm picking something in the shadows in this kind of gold color right here. All right, and then I can let go and I can close that. And you notice now it's adjusted my hue and saturation. That's the other technique. Then I have balance, how much between the highlights and the shadow. Right now it's evenly split. So if I go to the right, more highlights. If I go to the left, all shadows, right? So it's all just the gold that we added. This is all just the blue that we added to the highlights. This is perfectly in the middle, and then variations on it. All right, and double click and go back to the middle. If I click on this little thing right here, up and down, you can see before and after. If I hit the backslash key, that's before and after. Also, because I'm on the virtual copy. All right. So that's after, that's before. I'm not saying this is good color grading by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just showing you the technique of split toning. I actually am going to go back to the original because I don't want to color grade this photo. I like the original. In a future tutorial, I'll show you how you can have more control under the tone curve, and we'll look at the HSL slider.